Look at her very well. Are you mad? Look at your dirty wrapper, and look at the smooth Italian marble of my boutique floor. Do you know your level at all? Those words cut across a busy commercial avenue in Ikeja shortly after 1:00 on a Tuesday afternoon. Lola, the arrogant owner of the luxury velvet boutique, stood with her hands on her hips, her long artificial nails pointing directly into the face of a frail, elderly woman. The old woman, Mama Bisi, was shaking, her bare feet covered in thick road dust. Holding an empty plastic cup, just begging for a small drop of clean water to cool her throat. But instead of water, what she received was a heavy, aggressive push from Lola Alo's private security guard, sending her crashing straight onto the rough, hot concrete pavement. The wealthy shoppers standing around did not lift a finger. They simply adjusted their expensive designer sunglasses and walked past, pretending the elderly woman was just invisible trash on the floor. Lola believed the woman in the faded wrapper had no name worth remembering, and no one powerful enough to defend her. She was wrong. The stranger was connected to the family that now controlled the future of the commercial block. A few meters away, Ada, an ordinary mango seller struggling to keep her younger sister in treatment, was about to make a choice that would change several lives, none including her own. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let us return to that hot Tuesday afternoon in Ikeja. The concrete under the afternoon sun was hot enough to fry an egg. Ada wiped the beads of sweat from her forehead with the edge of her faded green scarf. She stood behind a single wooden crate, arranging her yellow, ripe mangoes with calculated precision. Every mango had to be placed beautifully, because her entire life depended on this small display. The day before, the pharmacist had reminded her that her younger sister Alo's medication would cost 4,200 naira by the end of the week. Ada had only 1,500 naira in the small metal tin box beneath her stall. Since their mother died, Ada had become Amara Alo's main caregiver, balancing market work, rent, food, clinic visits, and treatment for a congenital urinary obstruction that had worsened over the past year. The pressure followed her from morning until sleep. Just 5 meters away, the glass doors of the luxury velvet boutique swung open. A cool breeze of expensive, lavender-scented air conditioner escaped into the hot street. Lola stepped out, wearing a bright red silk dress that rustled loudly with every movement. Her face was twisted into a familiar expression of deep dissatisfaction as her eyes locked directly onto Ada Alo's wooden crate. To Lola, the hot street was her personal runway, and Ada Alo's small mango business was a local blemish that reduced the high-class value of her luxury establishment. Lola marched forward, her expensive high heels clicking sharply against the concrete walkway. She did not see a human being trying to survive. She only saw an obstruction to her client base. With a swift, aggressive motion of her foot, Lola kicked the base of Ada Alo's wooden crate. The fragile wood split instantly with a loud crack, and 27 ripe mangoes rolled into the muddy gutter and onto the busy road. A delivery truck roared past, its giant tires instantly crushing the soft fruit into a flat yellow paste against the hot asphalt. Ada froze, her hands remaining empty in the air. The sudden loss of her daily bread felt like a physical blow to her stomach. She did not scream, and she did not curse, because experience had taught her that the tears of a poor person only amuse the arrogant. She simply looked down at the ruined fruit, counting the lost naira notes in her mind as they dissolved into the dirt. Lola adjusted her gold bracelets, looking down her nose with cold satisfaction. She told Ada to pack her remaining rubbish and find another avenue, because her clients could not navigate through a local market crowd just to buy imported designer gowns. The surrounding shop owners watched the display from behind their glass windows. Nobody spoke, and nobody offered to help, because on this commercial avenue, alignment with wealth was considered the only rule of survival. Ada quietly dropped to her knees, her fingers touching the hot pavement as she began to gather the few unbroken mangoes left in the dust. Her heart was beating with a slow, painful rhythm, but her spirit remained unbroken. She knew that human dignity did not depend on the permission of a boutique owner. It was during this exact moment of tension that the elderly woman appeared at the corner of the avenue. She walked with a slow, dragging gait, her body bent slightly forward under the weight of extreme exhaustion. Her wrapper was faded to a dull gray color, torn at the edges, and her bare feet were coated in thick white road dust from hours of walking. Her eyes looked cloudy and disoriented, searching the faces of the rushing pedestrians for a single glance of human recognition. She carried nothing but a small, empty plastic cup, her lips dry and cracked from dehydration. The old woman stopped right at the entrance of Lola Alo's boutique, leaning her weak shoulder against the polished gold handrail. She lifted her empty plastic cup toward Lola, her voice coming out as a faint, raspy whisper, begging for just a small cup of tap water to cool her dry throat. Lola recoiled instantly, pulling her silk dress back as if she had encountered a dangerous, contagious disease. She shouted at the top of her voice, calling for her private security guard to clear the entrance immediately. The security guard, eager to please his wealthy employer, stepped forward with an aggressive stride. He grabbed the old woman Alo's frail arm with no hesitation, pulling her away from the gold handrail with unnecessary force. The old woman lost her footing on the smooth marble step, her weak knees giving way completely. She tumbled backward, her body hitting the hard concrete walkway with a dull thud. Her empty plastic cup rolled across the pavement, clinking softly before coming to a stop right at the edge of Ada Alo's broken wooden crate. The sound of the old woman Alo's body hitting the hard concrete was loud enough to make the fabric of the street pause for a split second. A heavy, collective silence rushed over the immediate vicinity as people looked, processed the sight, and then intentionally looked away. Mama Bisi lay on her side, her dusty fingers twitching slightly as she tried to find her orientation on the hot ground. Her gray wrapper had loosened slightly near her ankles, exposing old skin that was mapped with the lines of many difficult years. The private security guard simply turned his back, dusting his uniform hands as if he had just moved a bag of charcoal out of the shop's pristine entrance. Lola stood at the doorway, her lips tight with anger, muttering under her breath about how people from the interior provinces were coming to Lagos just to disturb the peace and business establishments. Ada did not stop to calculate the cost of her action, nor did she look to see if the surrounding eyes were judging her. She dropped the last unbroken mango back into her torn plastic bucket and moved across the hot pavement on her knees. Her heart was pounding hard against her ribs, not out of fear, but out of a deep, ancestral respect for old age that her mother had carved into her soul before she passed away. She reached out with her rough, calloused hands, gently supporting Mama Bisi Alo's shoulders to help her sit upright against the faded concrete wall of an adjacent electrical pole. The old woman Alo's skin felt paper-thin and burning hot to the touch, a clear sign that dehydration was rapidly draining the very little strength she had left. Ada reached for her small personal plastic container, which held exactly 1 cup of clean, filtered water that she had purchased with her last 50 naira coin to sustain herself until the late evening. Without a single thought about her own thirst or her empty pocket, she unscrewed the blue cap with her teeth and brought the container directly to Mama Bisi Aloe's dry, cracked lips. She held the old woman Aloe's head steady, tilting the water slowly so she wouldn't choke on the sudden moisture. Mama Bisi swallowed eagerly, her throat moving with a desperate, raspy sound as the cool liquid revived her internal organs. Every drop was like a small portion of life being injected back into a dying tree, and Ada watched her with the patience of a daughter. Lola walked down the steps of her boutique, her expensive gold anklets jingling with a sharp, mocking sound that cut through the hot air. She looked down at Ada and the old woman, her face twisted in an expression of pure, class-based arrogance that left no room for human empathy. She laughed loudly, a sharp, metallic sound that was designed to attract the attention of the upper-class patrons who were checking out the display windows nearby. She asked Ada if she had now assumed the role of a local missionary worker on a commercial avenue that was designated for high-revenue enterprises. She stated clearly that it was very natural for street failures to identify with street garbage, because birds of the same feathers always find comfort in the dirt together. Ada did not lift her eyes to look at Lola Aloe's expensive red dress, because she knew that engaging with an arrogant person only expands their platform of pride. She focused entirely on Mama Bisi, using the edge of her own clean, faded scarf to gently wipe the road dust and sweat from the old woman Aloe's forehead and cheeks. She asked the elderly woman in soft, respectful tones if she could feel her legs or if any bone was broken from the fall. Mama Bisi did not answer immediately with words. She simply stared into Ada Elo's eyes with a sharp, intelligent focus that did not match the rags on her body. Her hand, which was trembling just a few moments ago, reached out and touched Ada Elo's wrist with a firm, steady grip that carried an unspoken weight. From the boutique balcony above, two wealthy clients watched the scene while sipping imported fruit juice from tall glass cups. They made small, whispered jokes about how the local authorities needed to clear the walkways so that decent people could enjoy their shopping experience without witnessing such depressing sights. To them, the struggle for survival was just a background noise that could be muted with a higher car window or a thicker glass door. They did not see the deep injustice of a system where an old woman could be pushed to the ground for the crime of being thirsty. They only saw a minor social inconvenience that was disturbing the aesthetics of the high-end boutique district. Ada reached into her small apron pocket and pulled out the single small loaf of agege bread that she had bought at 10 a.m. to serve as her only food for the entire 24-hour cycle. The bread was slightly squashed from her movements, but it was fresh and whole, representing the entire boundary between her hunger and her survival. She broke the bread cleanly into two unequal parts, ensuring that the larger piece, which was almost 3/4 of the entire loaf, was placed gently into Mama Bisi Aloe's dusty palms. She smiled softly, telling the old woman, in plain Nigerian English, to take and eat, because the journey of life required strength, and the afternoon sun was still very far from setting. Mama Bisi looked down at the bread in her hands, her fingers feeling the texture of the cheap flour that millions of struggling citizens depended on daily. She looked at Ada L's small metal tin box, which was sitting open near the broken wooden stall, revealing only a few small coins and 2 torn naira notes. She knew immediately that this young woman was giving away her very last sustenance without any expectation of a reward, a return, or a validation from the public. It was an act of pure, unadulterated human righteousness that existed entirely outside the boundaries of material calculation. Mama Bisi took a small bite of the bread, chewing slowly as her eyes continued to register every detail of Ada Aloe's environment. Lola sneered loudly, stepping back toward her glass doors as a wealthy, regular customer pulled up in a clean, silver sedan. She turned around one last time, warning Ada that if that old beggar woman remained sitting near her storefront for another 15 minutes, she would personally call the local environmental task force to pack Ada Arlo's remaining mango buckets into their operational truck. She declared that the avenue had little tolerance for people who wanted to turn a luxury commercial center into a provincial charity home. The glass doors shut behind her with a soft, expensive click, cutting off the lavender-scented air once again. Ada ignored the threat, shifting her position so that her own body blocked the direct rays of the harsh afternoon sun from hitting Mama Bisi Alo's face. She began to pack the remaining mango pieces that were not ruined, her mind already shifting to how she would explain the financial deficit to the local pharmacist by Friday evening. She did not know that several security teams were searching the surrounding districts for an elderly woman who had left a disabled family vehicle earlier that morning. Mama Bisi had insisted on walking to a nearby address while the driver waited for roadside assistance, but she had left her phone in the car and taken a wrong turn. By the time the driver realized she had not returned, the family had begun a widening search. Ada simply sat in the dust, unaware of any of it. The hot wind carried the smell of exhaust fumes from the gridlocked traffic on the main avenue. Mama Bisi finished the last small crumb of the aged bread, her fingers moving to adjust her faded gray wrapper with a slow, deliberate grace. She did not look like a broken woman anymore. Her posture against the concrete pole had a quiet, unshakable steadiness that made Ada watch her with a curious respect. For more than 45 minutes, the elderly woman had remained silent, her dark eyes tracking every vehicle that slowed down near the luxury boutique. She watched Lola step out to welcome a wealthy regular customer, her face transforming instantly into a wide, theatrical smile that contrasted sharply with the cold venom she had spat into the dust just an hour ago. Ada continued her work, using a small kitchen knife with a worn wooden handle to carefully peel the bruised sections off her remaining mangoes. She could not afford to throw away anything that still had value, because every gram of good fruit represented a few extra naira notes for her sister Alo's weekly medical card. Her hands were sticky with the sweet yellow juice, but her mind was calculating the exact difference between survival and eviction from her small room down the street. She looked at Mama Bisi, noticing that the old woman was looking at the small, rusty metal tin that served as Ada Elo's cash box. Ada smiled softly, reassuring her that God always provided enough for the day, and that the loss of her wooden crate was just a minor bend on a long road. Lola Isle's loud voice broke through the low hum of the avenue once again as she stood under the shade of her canvas awning. She was talking to a wealthy woman draped in expensive lace, her voice high-pitched and full of artificial laughter, as she pointed toward the new construction cranes, towering over the far end of the district. She boasted loudly that the entire avenue was about to change because the famous Okafor Holdings Group had just completed the legal acquisition of the block for billions of naira. She sneered openly in Ada Alo's direction, telling her affluent client that very soon the local authorities would sweep all these illegal street traders into the back of a garbage truck to make room for a modern luxury plaza. The wealthy client nodded in agreement, casting a cold, judgmental glance at Ada Elo's broken crate before walking into the air-conditioned interior of the velvet boutique. To them, the poor were not citizens with names and families. They were just temporary obstacles that delayed the clean arrival of their imported European cars. Ada kept her eyes down, her knife moving with a steady, rhythmic motion that showed her self-control under the weight of their systematic rejection. She knew that reacting to their verbal insults would only grant them the satisfaction of validation. So she chose the power of silence. She simply placed another peeled mango into her clean plastic bucket, her dignity intact despite the dirt on her apron. Mama Bisi watched the entire interaction, her fingers tapping a slow, silent beat against her knee as her expression grew increasingly cold and analytical. She leaned closer to Ada, her voice returning in a clear, measured tone that carried an unexpected accent of high-level education, entirely different from the raspy whisper she had used earlier. She asked Ada why she remained so peaceful when people who had done nothing to build the earth were treating her like a secondary creature in her own country. Ada paused her knife for a brief second, looking at the old woman Al's sharp eyes, before answering that a person's worth is never determined by the size of their boutique or the roughness of their wrapper. She explained softly that her late mother had taught her that arrogance is just a psychological disease that strikes people who have money but zero character inside their souls. She stated that she could not allow Lola Alo's internal poverty to ruin the clean peace of her own heart, because she had a sister to keep alive and a destiny to fulfill. Mama Bisis listened to every word, her head nodding slowly with a deep ancestral approval that seemed to radiate from her fragile frame. She reached out and touched the wooden handle of Ada Alo's knife, telling her in a quiet, prophetic voice that the soil of the avenue was listening to her words, and that true gold never rots in the mud. Suddenly, the familiar rhythm of the commercial avenue was broken by a sharp, metallic sound that made several pedestrians stop in their tracks. A massive, dark blue security vehicle with heavily tinted windows slowed down near the curb, its engine idling with a deep, expensive rumble that signaled immense institutional power. Two men wearing crisp, dark, corporate suits and communication earpieces stepped out of the vehicle, their eyes moving across the crowd with a frantic, desperate urgency. They held high-resolution digital tablets in their hands, checking the faces of every elderly woman sitting along the walkways, with an intensity that created an immediate wave of nervous tension among the local shop owners. Lola immediately stepped out of her boutique, her long artificial eyelashes fluttering with excitement as she recognized the prominent corporate logo of Okafor Holdings on the front of the vehicle. She assumed that these high-level representatives had arrived to deliver an official notice about her lease renewal, or to invite her to the private executive gala for the new plaza development. She smoothed down the creases of her red silk dress, stepping off her marble floor onto the public walkway with an exaggerated posture of extreme importance. She called out to the lead corporate security officer, offering to assist them with any high-profile business inquiry they might have on her avenue. The corporate officers ignored Lola Alo's greeting completely, their eyes scanning past her expensive silk dress as if she were made of transparent glass. They walked directly toward the dusty corner where the electrical pole stood, their boots crunching sharply against the broken pieces of Ada Alo's wooden crate. Lola Alo's face froze in confusion, her mouth remaining half open as she watched the two high-level executives stop right in front of the poor mango seller, Alo's stall. The lead officer looked at the digital image on his tablet, then looked down at the old woman, sitting in the dust with the squashed loaf of ajaj bread in her hand. The officer Al's expression changed at once. Relief crossed his face, followed by concern as he crouched beside the woman and asked whether she was hurt. He spoke with visible relief, explaining that the driver had reported her missing after the vehicle breakdown, and that several security teams had been searching since late morning. Lola, heart stopped beating as she watched the high-level executive kneel in the dirt, realizing that the entire foundation of her arrogance was about to slide into a bottomless pit. The sound of the high-level corporate officer Ilo's boots settling into the roadside dust was followed by an absolute, crushing silence that flattened the noise of the entire avenue. Lola stood frozen on her marble doorstep, her hands still resting on her hips, but her long artificial nails were now shaking against the fabric of her expensive red silk dress. Her regular customer, the wealthy woman draped in imported lace, took 2 slow steps backward, intentionally creating physical distance between herself and the boutique owner, as if an invisible danger had suddenly been detected in the air. The 2 corporate security guards remained standing like dark stone pillars behind their kneeling superior, their communication earpieces humming with the silent data of a billion-dollar empire. Ada slowly lowered her worn kitchen knife onto the edge of her plastic bucket, her fingers sticky with mango juice as she looked from the kneeling executive to the old woman sitting against the electrical pole. She did not know what an executive board was, and she had never seen the corporate logo of Okafor Holdings on a dark blue luxury vehicle before. But she could read the terror written across the officer's face. Mama Bisi did not shift her position by even a single millimeter. She remained leaning against the concrete, her fingers still holding the larger piece of cheap age bread with a steady, unbothered grip. She looked down at the kneeling man with the cold, effortless authority of a sovereign who had spent her entire life managing large destinies. The lead officer, whose name tag read Marcus, did not lift his head, his voice remaining low and trembling as he pleaded with the matriarch of the Okafor family estate. He explained that her son, Tunde, had suspended his afternoon schedule and asked several security teams to search the surrounding districts. Before discussing anything else, Marcus asked whether she had fallen, felt dizzy, or needed immediate medical attention. Mama Bisi took one final, slow bite of the squashed bread, chewed it with deliberation, and then looked directly over Marcus Alo's shoulder toward the entrance of the velvet boutique. Lola Alo's throat went dry, her tongue feeling like a piece of leather inside her mouth as Mama Bisi Alo's sharp eyes locked onto her face. She tried to force her lips into another wide, theatrical smile to salvage her position, but the muscles in her jaw refused to cooperate, twitching nervously under the glare of the corporate guards. She began to stammer in plain, broken English, her arrogant tone dissolving into a pathetic, high-pitched whine as she stepped toward the dirt path. She told Marcus that there had been a large environmental misunderstanding on the walkway, and that she was actually preparing to offer the elderly matriarch a comfortable chair inside her air-conditioned showroom. Marcus did not even turn his body to look at Lola. He simply kept his eyes fixed on the dust near Mama Bisi Alo's bare feet, waiting for the single word that could either save his career or erase his entire livelihood by sunset. Mama Bisi swallowed her food cleanly, dusted the small crumbs from her gray wrapper, and then reached out her hand to touch Ada Alo's calloused wrist once again. She told Marcus in a clear, resonant voice that carried the weight of old wealth that her search for the true face of human dignity had ended right here in the dust. She stated that while the high-end boutique owners were busy treating her like livestock, this poor mango seller had divided her last survival bread to preserve an old stranger's life. The surrounding traders and shoppers began to gather in a wide, silent circle, their eyes wide with intense fascination as they witnessed the complete, instantaneous collapse of the avenue's social hierarchy. They looked at Ada, who was still sitting on her low wooden stool, her faded green scarf covered in road dust, looking out of place next to the high-level corporate security apparatus. Nobody spoke, and nobody moved, because the dramatic escalation of the moment was so real, and that even the passing traffic seemed to slow down to a crawl. Lola felt a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead, her mind spinning with the terrifying realization that her lease, her business, and her high-class status were balanced on the edge of a knife. Mama Bisi turned her face toward Ada, her expression softening into a deep, motherly warmth that was different from the icy authority she had used to address the corporate executives. She asked Ada to please gather her remaining mangoes and her small tin box, because she would not spend another single hour under the shadow of people who measured a human being Ilo's value by the price of their clothing. Ada looked at her broken wooden crate, then looked at the dark blue luxury vehicle with its engine rumbling like a sleeping beast, her heart beating with a rapid, uncertain rhythm. She hesitated for a brief 3 seconds, thinking about her sister Alo's weekly medication card and her empty room down the street, before quietly nodding her head in agreement. Marcus immediately stood up, motioning with his hand for the 2 standing security guards to step forward and assist with Ada Elo's remaining merchandise with the highest level of executive care. The 2 large men in crisp, dark suits immediately dropped to their knees in the dirt, carefully lifting the torn plastic buckets and the rusty metal tin box, as if they were handling diamonds from a bank vault. Lola watched her private security guard slide backward into the shadows of her boutique entrance, his face pale as he realized that his aggressive actions against the old woman had been recorded by the sharp eyes of the corporate world. The entire avenue watched in awe as the poor mango seller was escorted toward the vehicle like royalty. Before Ada entered the vehicle, 2 dark SUVs pulled up behind Marcus Alo's car. The lead door opened, and Tunde Okafor stepped out. He was the head of the real estate group that had recently acquired the commercial block, but in that moment he looked less like a billionaire than a worried son who had finally found his mother. Tunde stepped out of the vehicle before his private drivers could even open the door for him, his tailored designer suit moving sharply against the hot afternoon wind as his eyes locked onto his mother, Alo's form. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated relief, mixed with a terrifying undercurrent of raw corporate fury that made the surrounding shop owners hold their collective breath in fear. He marched forward with long strides, ignoring Marcus and the security detail as he headed straight toward the dusty walkway. The entire avenue felt the immediate shift in the atmospheric pressure, knowing that the final balance of accounts was about to be laid open on the concrete pavement. The leather soles of Tunde Okafor Alo's shoes made a distinct, authoritative sound as they touched the dusty concrete walkway. He walked directly past his security officers, his eyes focused entirely on Mama Bisi, who was still holding the remaining piece of aged bread in her hand. The young billionaire did not look at the luxury boutique, and he did not notice the crowd of onlookers who had gathered in a wide, fearful circle. He simply dropped his corporate posture completely, his knees touching the rough asphalt as he reached out to hold his mother, Alo's hands. His voice, which was usually sharp and cold during high-level corporate negotiations, came out as a soft, trembling whisper that revealed his relief. He asked her why she had chosen to walk into this busy commercial district alone, leaving her medication and her private drivers behind at the main family estate. He stated that his heart had been in his throat for more than 7 hours, thinking that something terrible had happened to her on these crazy metropolitan roads. Mama Bisi smiled softly, her fingers gently patting her son Alo's tailored shoulder, as if he were still just a small boy growing up in the local province. She told him to stand up and adjust his expensive designer suit, because a leader must never lose his orientation in public, no matter how the internal pressure of his heart might be. Tunde stood up slowly, his face instantly transforming back into a cold, impenetrable mask of immense institutional power as he looked at the surrounding environment. He noticed the split wood of Ada Ilo's broken mango crate, the yellow fruit crushed into the dirt, and the rusty metal tin box that was currently being held by his corporate security guards. His sharp eyes then moved toward the entrance of the luxury boutique, locking directly onto Lola, who was still standing on her marble steps. Lola felt a sudden, terrifying chill run down her spine, her hands dropping to her sides as she realized that the young man looking at her was the owner of her business existence. Mama Bisi pointed her finger toward Ada, who was still standing quietly next to her empty plastic buckets, her face covered in sweat and road dust. She told Tunde that while his high-priced security executives were busy driving around in air-conditioned vehicles, this young mango seller was the only person who recognized her humanity. She narrated how she had been denied a simple drop of water at the entrance of the luxury boutique, and how she was aggressively pushed onto the hot pavement like a common street dog. She stated clearly that Ada had sacrificed her own daily bread and her remaining drinking water to preserve an old stranger, Alo's life, without asking for a single coin in return. Tunde Alo's jaw tightened with a slow, dangerous rhythm as he listened to his mother Alo's words, his corporate fury rising like a dark storm over the entire avenue. He turned his body toward Lola, his voice coming out with a low, freezing precision that made the surrounding shop owners slide backward into the shadows of their buildings. He asked Lola if she was the principal tenant who had assumed the legal right to treat an elderly woman like garbage on a commercial block that belonged to his family Alo's development portfolio. Lola's knees buckled instantly, her face turning a ghastly shade of gray as she realized the true identity of the woman she had abused. She began to stumble forward onto the dirt path, her long artificial nails scratching nervously against her red silk dress as she dropped to her knees before the billionaire. She cried out in a high-pitched, desperate voice, begging for mercy, and stating that she had zero knowledge that the elderly woman was the respected matriarch of Okafor Holdings. She claimed that the metropolitan street was always full of deceptive local vagrants, and she was only trying to protect the aesthetic value of her luxury establishment for her high-class clients. She looked at Ada, her eyes wide with frantic pleading, begging the poor mango seller to intervene and speak a word of forgiveness on her behalf. Tunde did not allow her to finish her sentence. He lifted his right hand slightly, and the entire avenue fell into an absolute, suffocating silence once again. He looked down at Lola with a cold, detached expression that showed no room for emotional negotiation or corporate pity. He stated that a person who only shows respect to people with bank accounts is a moral hazard to any decent society. He added that her boutique floor was not more valuable than the fundamental dignity of a human being, and that her complete lack of empathy had officially invalidated her right to operate on his property. Tunde turned to Marcus and asked him to contact the property management and legal teams. The acquisition records showed that Lola Ilo's lease was approaching renewal, and Tunde wanted the renewal suspended while the company reviewed the incident, the conduct of her security staff, and previous complaints from traders on the block. He made one point clear. No decision would be improvised on the pavement, but neither would the company ignore what had happened. Lola stared at him, realizing that the business relationship she had treated as guaranteed was now under formal review. The wealthy, regular customer, who had been watching from the silver sedan, quickly signaled her driver to roll up the dark windows and accelerate away from the curb. The other local shop owners watched in awe, processing the silent, devastating lesson that was being laid open before their very eyes. They looked at Ada, who was standing still, her heart pounding with a mixture of deep pity for Lola and immense gratitude for the sudden turn of events. She realized that her sister Alo's kidney medication and her empty tin box were no longer going to be a source of daily terror in her life. Mama Bisi walked toward Ada, her dusty wrapper moving with that same quiet majesty as she reached out to embrace the young woman who had saved her. She told Ada that her days of sitting on a low wooden stool under the boiling afternoon sun were officially over, because a pure heart must always inherit a secure foundation. Tunde motioned for his drivers to open the heavy, armored doors of his lead luxury vehicle, inviting Ada to step inside with the highest level of executive honor. The entire avenue watched in deep, emotional silence as the poor mango seller left the dusty walkway, her dignity fully restored before the community. The smooth leather seats of the luxury armored vehicle felt foreign against Ada Alo's dusty, worn clothes. She sat rigidly near the tinted glass window, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap as she watched the commercial avenue fade into a small black dot in the distance. The cool, quiet air inside the SUV washed over her heated skin, erasing the smell of exhaust fumes and hot concrete that had been her constant companion for many years. Mama Bisi sat directly across from her, her grey wrapper now arranged neatly, her face calm and unbothered as she looked out at the sprawling city of Lagos. Tunde Okafor sat next to his mother, his fingers moving rapidly across the glowing screen of his corporate mobile phone, his face still holding that tight, fiercely protective expression. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes of the journey, allowing the deep, vibrating hum of the engine to fill the internal space of the car. Ada looked down at her feet, noticing that the road dust from the walkway had left a light white film on the expensive dark carpet of the vehicle floor. She felt a sudden, sharp wave of embarrassment wash over her chest, wondering if she should have asked to stay behind, to look for another wooden crate down the street. She thought about her younger sister, Amara, who was currently lying down on a thin foam mattress in their single rented room, waiting for the sound of Ada Alo's footsteps returning with the daily market profit. The fear of the upcoming weekend medical bill began to knock on her heart again, a familiar, painful rhythm that she could not shake off. Mama Bisi noticed the sudden tightening of Ada Alo's jaw and the way her fingers were pressing hard against her own knuckles. She reached across the wide leather space, placing her soft, warm palm directly over Ada Alo's rough hands, her touch carrying a silent, grounding reassurance that made Ada lift her eyes. The elderly matriarch smiled softly, her voice coming out with a calm, deliberate melody that bypassed Ada Alo's internal defenses. She told Ada that when a person carries the weight of a pure soul through a storm, they must never look back at the mud with regret. She added that the soil she had been standing on today was just a temporary passage, and that her true house was already prepared ahead of her. Tunde finished his digital communication, locking his phone with a sharp click before turning his full attention toward the young woman sitting across from him. He looked at her faded green scarf, the rough texture of her apron, and the small, rusty, metal tin box that sat on the seat next to his chief security officer. He did not see a common street trader. He saw the human shield that had protected his mother Alo's body from the concrete when the rest of the world was looking away. His voice, when he finally spoke, was measured and formal, carrying the clear weight of a man who managed thousands of corporate lives daily. He addressed Ada as his sister, stating clearly that the Okafor family does not leave an outstanding moral debt unsettled on the ledger of life. He explained that the redevelopment plan included a vendor support program for small traders who would otherwise be displaced by construction. The program offered business training, modest startup grants, and subsidized stalls in a dedicated market wing of the new plaza. Tunde told Ada that, if she wanted the opportunity, the foundation would help her apply through an independent team and would cover her first year of rent while she learned to run a formal produce business. The offer was substantial, but it was a beginning rather than a finished life handed to her in an afternoon. Ada Elo's breath caught sharply in her throat, her lips parting as she tried to process the massive, life-altering data that the young billionaire was presenting so casually. She tried to speak, to explain that she was just an ordinary girl who sold mangoes from a single wooden crate to buy kidney medication for her sister, Amara. She wanted to tell him that she did not perform the act of kindness to secure a prime retail storefront or to gain the favor of a real estate empire. Tunde told her that she had not helped his mother in order to earn a reward. That was precisely why he wanted to give her a fair opportunity rather than a ceremonial gift she had no preparation to manage. Meanwhile, the property management team began its review of the incident. Witness statements, security footage from nearby shops, and earlier complaints from street traders showed that the confrontation was not an isolated misunderstanding. Lola Alo's security guard was suspended pending investigation, and his employer opened a separate disciplinary review into his use of force. The management company also confirmed that Lola Alo's lease was approaching renewal. After reviewing the documented conduct on the premises and several prior complaints, the company informed her that the lease would not be renewed at the end of its term. She received the notice period required by the agreement and instructions for removing her property or placing it in licensed storage. The decision did not destroy her right to trade elsewhere, but it ended her assumption that wealth and connections guaranteed a permanent place on that block. For the first time, Lola had to face consequences without a crowd to impress. Some clients stayed, others left, and her suppliers made their own commercial decisions. The result was less theatrical than instant ruin, but more difficult to dismiss. Her choices had damaged the trust on which her business depended. Back at the private medical center, Ada walked out onto the wide, sunlit balcony of her sister Elo's suite, looking out at the sprawling, vibrant city of Lagos with a new sense of internal alignment. She could hear the faint, distant hum of the metropolitan traffic, but it no longer sounded like a dangerous, devouring beast that was waiting to crush her family, Alo's survival. She felt the cool breeze move her faded green scarf, her spirit feeling light and whole, secure in the knowledge that human dignity is a sovereign territory that no wealthy bully can ever conquer permanently. She smiled as she thought of her sister Amara Alo's upcoming recovery, realizing that their long night of suffering had finally dissolved into a brilliant, steady dawn. On Wednesday morning, Ada met the Foundation Alo's patient liaison and small business coordinator in a quiet office at the medical center. There were forms to complete, identification documents to recover from her rented room, clinic records to request, and questions about Amara Alo's treatment history. The coordinator explained that the vendor program was not a gift shop waiting for her name. Participants attended bookkeeping lessons, food handling training, and supplier workshops before they could receive a stall. Ada asked whether accepting medical assistance for Amara would force her to join the business program. The liaison said no. The healthcare support and the vendor opportunity were separate decisions, and Ada could refuse one without losing the other. That answer mattered to her. For the first time since leaving the avenue, she felt that she was being offered help without being turned into somebody else's property. Across town, the property team interviewed traders who had worked near Lola Alo's boutique for years. Some were reluctant to speak. Others described repeated arguments over the walkway, threats to call enforcement officers, and occasions when informal sellers had been pushed away from public space in front of the shop. Investigators also collected video from neighboring businesses. The footage showed Lola kicking Ada Alo's crate and the security guard using unnecessary force against Mama BC. When Marcus informed Tunde of the findings, Tunde wanted a fast answer. His legal director advised him to let the process run properly. Anger, she reminded him, was not a substitute for procedure. Tunde accepted the point. The company would document the incident, review the lease, and make a decision it could defend without relying on his family name. The following morning, Ada returned briefly to the avenue with a foundation coordinator to collect the few belongings she had left with a neighboring trader. The broken crate was still beside the gutter. Some of the crushed mangoes had been washed away by the night rain, but yellow stains remained on the asphalt. Ada stood there longer than she expected. A woman who sold roasted corn 2 shops away came over and handed Ada a small plastic bag containing the knife, scarf, and coins she had forgotten during the confusion. She also admitted that she had seen Lola kick the crate, but had been afraid to speak. Ada did not scold her. Fear had kept many people silent on that avenue, especially traders whose livelihoods could be disrupted by a complaint or a visit from enforcement officers. The coordinator photographed the damaged crate and recorded Ada Aylar's estimate of the lost stock. She explained that compensation for the destroyed goods would be handled separately from the vendor program. Ada would receive the value of the documented loss, but the larger business opportunity would still depend on training and her own decision to participate. That distinction reassured Ada. She did not want the story of her life reduced to a billionaire paying for kindness. She had sold fruit in heat and rain for years, learned which wholesalers were reliable, remembered what regular customers liked, and survived on margins so small that one damaged crate could ruin a week. What she lacked was not willingness to work. She lacked room to recover from a single bad day. Before leaving, Ada looked through the boutique window. Lola was inside, speaking with 2 representatives from the property company. There was no dramatic confrontation. No one was shouting. Documents lay on the counter between them, and Lola was listening with a seriousness Ada had never seen on her face. For a moment their eyes met through the glass. Ada nodded once and walked away. At the medical center, Amara was awake when Ada returned. She was angry at first, not because of the treatment, but because Ada had allowed strangers to see the condition of their room during the transfer. Ada laughed for the first time in days and told her sister that embarrassment was a luxury they could discuss after the doctors finished helping her. Amara asked what had really happened on the avenue. Rumors were already spreading through phone calls from neighbors, each version more exaggerated than the last. In one story, Ada had inherited a plaza. In another, she had become engaged to Tunde. In a third, Lola had been arrested by soldiers. Ada shook her head. None of that happened, she said. I gave an old woman water. Her family found her. They are helping with your treatment, and they offered me a chance to learn how to build a proper business. Amara studied her face. And the boutique woman? She will answer for what she did through the proper process. That is all? That is enough. Amara smiled weakly. She knew her sister well enough to understand the answer. Ada had spent years fighting bills, landlords, medicine shortages, and market losses. She did not have spare energy for revenge. Later that afternoon, Mama Bisi visited Amara Alo's room after receiving a medical check of her own. The fall had left bruising but no fracture. She carried no dramatic gifts, only a small bag of oranges from the hospital shop. Amara looked from the oranges to Ada and began to laugh. "What is funny?" Mama Bisi asked. "My sister sells fruit, and you brought her more fruit." Mama Bisi laughed too. The sound changed the atmosphere of the room. For several minutes they spoke about ordinary things. Food, the neighborhood where the sisters had grown up, the mother they had lost, and the years Ada had spent trying to keep the household together. Mama Bisi did not make another speech about destiny. She listened. That was when she learned that Ada had left secondary school before completing her final examinations, because Amara Alo's health had deteriorated after their mother Alo's death. Ada had always intended to return, but each year brought another emergency. The business coordinator, who was present for part of the conversation, later added an optional adult education component to Ada Alo's development plan. Ada protested when she heard about it. "One thing at a time," she said. The coordinator smiled. "Exactly, one thing at a time." That sentence became the rule for the rest of the week. The doctors did not promise a miracle. They explained the procedure, the risks, the expected recovery period, and the need for continued follow-up. Ada asked questions until she understood. When medical language confused her, she asked again. No one rushed her. The business team behaved the same way. They did not ask her to sign a 10-year agreement in a hospital room. They showed her the program rules, the rent subsidy, the conditions for renewal, and the records she would need to keep. Ada discovered that formal business language could be almost as intimidating as medical language. But she also discovered that both became manageable when someone explained them without contempt. Meanwhile, Tunde visited the property office rather than the avenue. He reviewed the acquisition file and learned that the block contained a mixture of old leases, month-to-month arrangements, informal stalls, and unresolved complaints. The redevelopment project had been designed on paper, as if those people were merely numbers attached to square meters. The incident with his mother forced him to see the weakness in that approach. He instructed the development team to map the informal traders who depended on the area and to consult them before finalizing relocation plans. Not everyone would receive a free shop, and the project could not solve every hardship in Ikeja. But the company could stop pretending that redevelopment occurred on empty land. Mama Bisi approved of that change more than any punishment directed at Lola. "If all you learn from this is how to remove one woman," she told Tunde, "then you have learned very little." Tunde did not argue. By Thursday, the property review had produced a clearer picture of Lola Elo's situation. Her lease was not being cancelled overnight. It was approaching renewal, and the management company had discretion not to renew, based on the documented history of conflict, safety concerns, and repeated complaints. Lola would have time to move her stock and seek another location. The security guard Alo's case was handled separately. Video showed that he had used unnecessary force against Mama Bisi after she was already moving away from the entrance. His employer suspended him and began a disciplinary process. Mama Bisi declined to turn the matter into a public spectacle, but she gave a statement and insisted that the footage be preserved. Lola heard all of this from her lawyer. The consequences were serious, but they were not magical. No national registry erased her name. No billionaire seized her dresses. No municipal charity truck arrived to take her property. She faced something more ordinary and, in its own way, more instructive: damaged trust, a non-renewed lease, legal expenses, and the need to decide whether she would repeat the same behavior somewhere else. That was why she eventually asked to see Ada. By Wednesday evening, the harsh edge of the sun had softened over the medical center courtyard. Inside the room, the quiet beeping of the bedside monitors reassured Ada that Amara was stable, while the doctors prepared her for the procedure recommended by the urology team. Ada sat quietly in a plush leather armchair by her sister's bedside, her calloused fingers gently stroking Amara's sleeping hand. For the first time in 4 long years, the suffocating knot of anxiety in Ada Alo's chest had unraveled, leaving behind a deep, peaceful clarity that felt foreign yet incredibly beautiful. Mama Bisi stood by the large glass window, looking at her son, Tunde Okafor, who was standing on the manicured lawn below, reviewing building blueprints with a team of engineers. She turned her head toward Ada, her dark eyes reflecting the soft evening light with a look of profound, motherly validation. She remarked that a human being Alo's life is like a seed sown in the ground, and that the quality of the fruit depends entirely on the condition of the soil in the heart. She noted that while many people walk through life trying to gather gold by trampling on the vulnerable, true wealth is found in the simple ability to recognize another person's humanity. Ada looked down at her apron, which still carried the faint yellow stains of the mangoes she had peeled in the dust earlier that afternoon. She whispered softly that she had spent many nights praying for a miracle to save her sister, but she had never imagined that the answer would come from a simple cup of water and a shared loaf of bread. She admitted that on the hot concrete walkway, where everyone was rushing to meet their own targets, it was very easy to lose sight of hope. Mama Bisi walked over, her faded grey wrapper rustling softly, and placed her hand over Ada Alo's, reminding her that when the world is dark, a single genuine act of compassion can ignite a fire that rewrites an entire lineage. At that exact moment, the quiet atmosphere of the medical wing was broken by a soft, hesitant knock on the mahogany door. Marcus, the chief executive security officer, stepped into the room with quiet, disciplined strides, holding a digital tablet under his arm. He approached Mama Bisi with a respectful posture, lowering his eyes as he informed her that a certain individual was waiting down in the main corporate lobby, desperately begging for a single minute of an audience. He explained that Lola, the former boutique owner, had refused to leave the estate boundary, weeping on the concrete floor and demanding to see the poor mango seller who had held her destiny. Ada paused, her heart skipping a beat as she looked at Mama Bisi, her mind instantly flashing back to the raw image of Lola Alo's aggressive high heels kicking her wooden crate into the muddy street gutter. She remembered the direct verbal insults, the mocking laughter of the wealthy clients, and the humiliation she had endured in silence just a few hours ago. But as she looked at her sister Alo's peaceful face on the medical bed, she realized that bitterness was a heavy, useless baggage that had no place in her new life. She looked at the elderly matriarch, her voice steady and clear as she asked if they could allow the broken woman to come up to the suite. Mama Bisi nodded her head slowly, a faint, analytical smile touching her lips, as she signaled Marcus to execute Ada Alo's request with immediate corporate effect. 5 minutes later, the door swung open once again, and Lola stepped into the luxury suite, looking stripped of her past high-class identity. Her expensive red silk dress was wrinkled. Her long artificial nails were broken from packing her own inventory in the dust. and her face was heavily swollen from hours of continuous weeping. She looked around the medical room, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and immense terror as she realized the true level of luxury Ada now occupied. Lola did not wait to be addressed. She dropped heavily onto her knees right by the doorway, her hands trembling violently as she stretched them out toward Ada Allo's feet. She cried out in a broken, high-pitched voice, her arrogant tone replaced by a desperate provincial plea for survival. She asked Ada whether she would speak to the property team on her behalf. She admitted that fear, pride, and obsession with appearances had shaped the way she treated people on the avenue, and that she had not expected consequences because those she humiliated usually had no power to answer her. Ada looked down at the kneeling woman from her armchair, her expression calm, showing no signs of malicious satisfaction or vindictive triumph. She did not remind Lola of the 27 ruined mangoes, and she did not mock her broken red dress, because she understood that true dignity does not find joy in the destruction of an enemy. She stood up slowly, her dusty apron moving forward as she walked over to the doorway and gently reached out her hand to support Lola Allo's trembling elbow. She asked Lola to stand. "You do not need to kneel to me," Ada said. "You needed to see people before they became useful to you." Ada looked Lola directly in the eyes. "Your flaw was never worth more than a thirsty woman," she said. "I forgive you, but forgiveness does not erase consequences. What happens to your lease is for the property team to decide." Lola listened to the words, her head dropping forward in deep, genuine shame as the raw truth of her moral bankruptcy broke through her pride. Ada turned toward the window, catching Tunde Okafor's eye as he walked back toward the corporate building entrance with his chief executives. She stepped out onto the wide corridor to meet him, her spirit feeling absolutely whole and aligned with the laws of human righteousness. She knew that the commercial avenue would never be the same again, and that her small mango stall had built a bridge that would protect many generations of struggling street vendors from systematic abuse. The scales of karma had balanced themselves on the concrete pavement of Ikeja, proving to the entire community that compassion is the highest currency of the soul. The property decision remained separate from Ada Allo's forgiveness. Tunde told Lola that the management company would complete its review under the lease terms, and that Ada would not be used as a shield from accountability. Ada asked only that Lola be treated fairly and allowed to rebuild elsewhere if she chose to change. Lola thanked her quietly and left the room without another speech, as the three individuals looked at each other. Mama Bisi reached out her hand, her warm fingers locking tightly around Ada's rough wrist, her smile full of a deep, motherly warmth that healed the remaining scars of the walkway. She told Ada that Amara Allo's corrective procedure had been scheduled for Friday morning, after the specialist team completed its evaluation and pre-operative tests. She added that the entire financial liability for the treatment had already been settled by the Okafor Family Foundation, transforming Ada Allo's long, suffocating night of survival into a brilliant, steady dawn. Ada dropped to her knees by the bed, her forehead resting against Mama Bisiello's blanketed lap as thick, hot tears of immense relief finally broke through her self-control. She did not weep out of sorrow or pain. She wept because the crushing weight of the 4,200 naira weekly pharmacist debt had been lifted from her shoulders forever. She could hear the faint, distant hum of the metropolitan traffic outside the sunlit balcony, but it no longer sounded like a dangerous, devouring beast waiting to crush her family Allo's life. She knew that her small, broken wooden stall had become the foundation for a large legacy of justice that would protect many generations of street traders on that block. Tunde walked to the window, his profile sharp against the fading evening light as he looked down at the construction cranes preparing the new plaza wing. He knew that by Monday morning, Ada Elo's name would be displayed beautifully over a permanent, modern retail establishment, securing her future and her dignity before the entire community. The commercial avenue was learning a permanent, historical lesson. That the eyes looking down on a person in rags today might be the exact same eyes begging them for a drop of mercy tomorrow. The scales of karma had balanced themselves in the dirt of Ikeja, proving that character is the only crown that survives the passage of time. Friday morning arrived clear and quiet over the medical center. Amara was awake in bed, tired but calm after completing the final pre-operative checks. The specialist team had confirmed that she was stable enough for the corrective procedure intended to relieve the obstruction that had been damaging her kidney function. The small, rusty metal tin box that had held Ada Ilo's Meager Street savings sat quietly on the mahogany side table, remaining as a silent witness to the long, suffocating night that had finally come to an end. Ada stood by her sister Alo's side, her faded green scarf neatly arranged around her shoulders, her hands holding a clean glass of water with a steady, peaceful posture. She did not look like the exhausted woman who had knelt in the road dust just 3 days ago. Her spirit had found an internal alignment that radiated through her eyes. Mama Bisi sat in the plush leather armchair across the room, her elegant grey wrapper draped over her knees as she watched the two sisters with a profound motherly warmth. Tunde Okafor stepped into the suite at 8:43 a.m., his crisp designer suit moving sharply with his long, disciplined strides as he nodded to his security officers standing outside the door. He placed the vendor program folder on the table and reminded Ada that the first training session would begin the following week. If she completed the program and chose to continue, the foundation would help her secure a subsidized produce stall in the new market wing when construction was finished. Ada looked down at the papers with gratitude, but also with a clear understanding that the opportunity would require months of learning and work. She looked at Tunde and Mama Bisi, her voice coming out with a clear, resonant rhythm that carried the deep educational depth of a woman who understood the true balance of life. She stated softly that she would use her new position to ensure that every struggling vendor and vulnerable citizen who approached her storefront would be treated with the highest level of human respect. She noted that a business that did not build a bridge for the less fortunate was just an empty monument of stone, and that true prosperity was measured by how many lives you lifted out of the mud. Mama Bisi smiled deeply, her head nodding with an ancient, prophetic approval that felt like a quiet blessing over Ada Alo's future path. Months later, the commercial block looked different. Construction had progressed, the new market wing was open, and several former street vendors had completed the support program. Lola Alo's old lease had expired, and another tenant had taken the unit after the property team completed its normal process. The lesson left behind was not that one billionaire could erase anyone he disliked. It was that status did not place a business owner above consequences. Ada had completed her training and opened a modest produce shop in the market wing. She knew her suppliers by name, kept careful records, and still displayed mangoes at the front because they reminded her where the journey began. Amara continued her recovery and follow-up care after the procedure. Later that morning, the surgeon entered the room, signaling that it was time to transfer Amara to the operating theater for her scheduled kidney procedure. Ada walked next to her sister Alo's mobile stretcher until they reached the double doors of the surgical wing, her hand holding Amara Aloes with an absolute, steady strength. She watched the doors close softly, her heart calm and free of the old terror, because she knew that the invisible hand of karma that had rewritten her destiny would finish its perfect work of healing. She returned to the suite, sitting down next to Mama Bisi, her fingers resting peacefully over the rusty metal tin box, as the bright morning sun filled the room. Several months later, Mama Bisi visited Ada Elo's shop in the new market wing without an entourage. Ada was arranging a basket of ripe mangoes near the entrance when she saw the familiar grey wrapper and laughed. Mama Bisi picked up one mango and reached into her bag to pay. Ada pushed the money gently back toward her. This one is on me," she said. Mama Bisi looked at the fruit, then at the young woman who had once shared her last water and bread with a stranger. Around them, customers moved through the market. Traders called out prices, and Amara sat behind the counter, checking the day Aloe's receipts while continuing her recovery. Ada had not become wealthy overnight, and Lola had not disappeared from the world. One woman had been given a fair chance to build. The other had been forced to confront the cost of how she treated people. The difference began on a hot pavement in Ikeja, when no reward was visible and no powerful audience was watching. Character is revealed most clearly in what we do when we believe the person in front of us can offer nothing in return.